History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.
Hello, friends. I'm Derrick Beeler, and welcome to the History of Aviation podcast. In this episode 38, myself, David Rowe, and Dave Gorman will be discussing the Douglas SBD Dauntless.
All right. Hello, everyone. Glad you've joined us for what I'm sure is going to be an interesting discussion. Tonight, it's the Douglas SBD Dauntless, which is a legendary aircraft that was originally designed by Northrop Aviation. They were bought up by Douglas Aircraft, and Douglas Aircraft took over production and turned it into an absolutely essential carrier-based scout aircraft and dive bomber for the U.S. Navy. It was in use from the mid-1940s through about 1944, and then it was phased out and replaced by some more modern aircraft. But it will be forever remembered for its amazing performance at the Battle of Midway in World War II, where the U.S. Navy and Marine pilots flew the Dauntless against the might of the Japanese Navy and sank 4 of their aircraft carriers in one day. This is generally considered the turning point of the war against the Japanese in World War II. It's just an amazing aircraft with a really rich history behind it. Dave, wouldn't you agree?
Oh my gosh. Well, it definitely is not a Wildcat, was it?
No.
Which the Japanese fight. I mean, hey, all props to the Wildcat, which was a heck of a plane. But this plane packed a punch in more ways than one. Pretty fantastic game changer in terms of all the things that it did with, the rear gunner, the dive brakes, the trapeze release on the bomb, all those things that made this plane just excellent at what it was to do, which was a dive bomber and protect the fleet and scouting and all of those multi-role type of aircraft that really made its mark. And you mentioned Midway, but it showed up time and time again and carried us through, and then was replaced by some somewhat less attractive ungainly aircraft. Looking at you, what does that thing call you?
The Helldiver.
The Helldiver, yeah. Looking at you, Helldiver. But the Dauntless was a fantastic aircraft, and I'm excited to talk about it. I think this may have been the first model I ever built. And I mentioned 2 of the features that just really stuck out to me because, when you got your hands on a model, I'm 10 years old, hands on a model, you're building stuff and you're like, what are these things that look like all the holes in them, the dive brakes, and they open up and they're red on the inside and how does that work? And what is the purpose of that? My dad was telling me about how it would help slow it down. And he's saying, basically he's going to be pointing straight down. He's got to have that kind of control and be able to dive right onto the enemy ships and everything like that. And it's just like, this is incredible. Look at this thing. And the idea of the guy sitting facing backwards, I just thought that was fascinating, having the rear gunner and everything like that. And a plane that looked like this when so much was happening. Straight and level flight facing backwards. Okay. Yeah, that's probably pretty good. But in a dive facing backwards, that's a lot of trust. So what a great plane though.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's phenomenal. You're right. Sitting, going backwards, shooting at, the Japanese or whomever was chasing them at the time. It's got to be terrifying. Also, if you didn't know, the seat turns around. And one of the jobs of that backseater, if he's not firing his gun, is to read off altitudes to the pilot. So the pilot knows how much further he can go in the dive before he's got to let go of that bomb. So, I mean, that pilot he's not the pilot, but the man in the back has a very important job, not only defending the aircraft, but, making sure the bombing is done correctly.
Incredible teamwork.
Yeah, in that kind of situation, it's all about teamwork, operating the radios and when it's being a scout, you got 2 pairs of eyes in it as opposed to 1. So, I mean, it's just a great machine, very capable. And it's
this is a design that to me really screams of, being kind of early or late 30s, when obviously it was. It has some features that look kind of stubby and a bit ungainly and everything, but but it really was designed for the war that it was in. They were learning quickly about the obsolescence of some of the aircraft that we had available in the Pacific and on carriers at the beginning of the war. And this guy showed up and just started landing haymakers against the Japanese, like you said. So where would we have been without the Dauntless?
It literally helped change the tide of the war. So there's your answer right there. It would have been a bad situation for the Navy defending the islands, Midway and the Hawaiian Islands in particular, if we didn't have this machine there to push the Japanese back, not only at Midway, but at Coral Sea, at Guadalcanal, and all across the islands, throughout the war up until, about 1944. It was used all across the Pacific.
Well, carrier-based for the most part, as far as Navy and Marine Corps. Although the Marine Corps, I guess, had some land-based, didn't they?
That's exactly right. The when the Dauntless first came out, the SBD-1, it did not have good range. It didn't have large enough fuel tanks, and so the Navy pushed them off to the Marines because they were working from land bases, and they didn't need huge range. So the Marines, got the cast-offs from the Navy and made good use of it.
That never happens. Yeah, they really did, and maybe they worked some things out and everything, and proved its value and its worth as a again, the counterpunch that it was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Douglas continued to upgrade this machine: larger fuel tanks, self-sealing tanks. They upgraded engines. Even the gun that the backseater used went from a single 30 millimeter to a dual 30 millimeter to pack an even bigger punch. So, I mean, constant upgrades. It never became a fast airplane, hence its nickname, Slow But Deadly, SBD. But it always packed a punch, was very maneuverable, and apparently easy to fly when you were coming into land.
I might have been 20 before I found out that actually meant Scout Bomber Douglas instead of Slow But Deadly. But
exactly, because everything that you read was always slow but deadly. And to be honest, I actually looked it up. The Japanese Zero, it flies at about 315 to 330 miles an hour. The SBD tops out at about 250. So we're talking a lot of difference between the Japanese Zero and the SBD. But on the other hand, the SBD was more nimble. It could turn inside the Zero.
Absolutely.
So, even though it wasn't faster, it had capabilities that the Zero didn't have. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, we know that, the Zeros were lightweight, poorly armored. They lit up pretty well once you hit them, and having those twin guns, like you said, by the time that happened, I'm sure that was Japanese did not want to get in close for a tangle with these guys. And I was reading somewhere that some of the very first interactions they had with Dauntlesses, they didn't realize what it was until holy hell rained on them when they got in too close, and all of a sudden they're being shot at from behind the pilot instead of head on or from the wings or whatever.
Well, the other thing is the SBD does have twin 50 millimeter guns in the cowling that shoot through the propeller, so it packs a punch on both ends. So it actually shot down quite a few aircraft. It was not a great fighter, but it was a very capable fighter when need be.
It held its own, didn't it?
Absolutely, sure did.
So I mentioned earlier about that trapeze thing with the bomb, and what was the size of this bomb? Was it a 500-pound typically?
Typically 500 pounds. I did read that it could carry on the center line a little over 1,000 pounds of bombs. So you could put some pretty hefty sized bombs there, but I think typically it was 500 pounds underneath and maybe 100-pound bombs out on the wing hard points.
Yeah. So, it had some flexibility there, like you say, but that model that I mentioned when I built it, at the time I was into little flying dioramas and hanging them from the ceiling. I know I'm not the only one of the three of us who did that, right?
I had
not.
probably,
All right, thank you.
I've got at least a dozen airplanes hanging in my basement right now and another dozen hanging at my office at work. So, no, I am
Okay.
still doing it to this day.
How many boxes, unbuilt models do you have?
Uh, 20 or 30.
All right. Well, see, I know Zach Boffman, who I hope is listening. He's got probably at least that many Thunderbolts still waiting in the queue to get through. But I hung this one and I got really crafty. I had some fishing line, thumbtacks in the ceiling with fishing line around the tail and the cowling and everything right behind the propeller, I guess. And I actually had another piece of fishing line attached to the bomb. So I had the trapeze coming down and the bomb falling clear as this thing was in a dive, which
Oh, yeah.
I thought looked pretty cool. I was just fascinated with this idea that you got to clear the prop. You got to clear the prop. That, how does a bomb get into the prop? Well, you got to be pointing straight down, basically. I mean, these were some pretty heavy duty dives, and I just loved the idea that these guys were facing down, staring down the enemy, diving down from above, and just dropping bombs on them. I just thought, what a machine.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. As a matter of fact, I just finished watching the movie Midway from about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And there's some really impressive scenes in it of you in the cockpit looking down on the Japanese aircraft carriers. And, if that's even close to what it was really like, I mean, the pilots and the men that flew in these things, I mean, you're talking about some really heavy duty, what's between their legs.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, the idea that they could come out of that land, survive, land, and then go up and do it again is just how do you if that is the task that you have, and thank God that those men were there to do it, because we lost a lot of them, and there were a lot of damage done with this particular aircraft. But I mean, the job was really clear. What this plane was built to do, it did better than almost anything else. Certainly anything else that we had at the time.
Oh yeah, there was nothing else in the inventory that could do the job it was doing. Speaking of the dive, I read that when they pulled out of that dive, they were pulling 6 to 8 Gs. So I mean, a 1930s design that can handle 6 or 8 Gs of pull. That's impressive.
Well, when you think about the G suits oh wait, that's right, they didn't have G suits.
They did not.
It was just you against physics at that point, and holding on for dear life and hoping you can pull out and point it in the right direction while the blood comes back to your brain.
Yeah. The one of the interesting things I learned is that you may not know this, but the wings do not fold on the Dauntless. It was designed with straight wings, where most Navy aircraft fold up so that they can fit on the lifts of the aircraft carrier and take up as least space in the hangars as possible. Well, the Dauntless is not built that way. It is built with a honeycomb interior for strength. It doesn't actually have a main spar like most aircraft does. So it's built to be extra strong, and they didn't want to, put a bend in it so that it could, because if you're pulling 6 or 8 Gs, that's not a good thing to have. And the technology wasn't there yet, I guess. So they built the aircraft as small as possible so that it would fit within the hangars and the lifts, but it still had the straight wings that didn't fold. And interestingly, the way they stored these aircraft on a carrier is they built little, I don't know what you call them, but little rails that ran outside the deck, and they would back the aircraft so that the front wheels were on the aircraft carrier and the back wheel was on this little piece of metal that stuck out over the ocean. And that's how they saved space with the Dauntless.
Goodness. Well, that tells you that how bad they needed it, how bad they wanted it, that they were going to make that type of accommodation because the fleet had to have the Dauntless.
Absolutely.
Wow. More proven. So we mentioned about the Marine Corps that they flew this. The Army flew something along these lines, right? What did they call this thing when the Army was flying it? The A-24?
The Banshee.
The Banshee. What's up with
That's
that?
correct. Well, the Army saw what the German military was capable of doing with the Stuka in Europe during its Blitzkrieg, and they were looking for something similar that the U.S. Army could use. And basically, the Navy already had a dive bomber in hand, and they said, "Well, we want to try it out." And so they purchased them, put them into use. I don't think they were anywhere near as successful as the Stuka was for its time, but they still used them all across the Pacific, in North Africa, and even in Europe. So they were used all over the place.
Well, we know about the A-36 that it was used in that role, attack and ground attack and things like that, and was a dive bomber, I believe as well. But so yeah, this was different, and the A-36 I thought was originally Air Force design, Army Air Force design, right? Does that sound
I
right?
believe that's correct. Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah, and then so the Dauntless came from Navy development, and then was maybe adapted to the Army Air Force's use, I guess.
Correct. They removed the tail hook because it wasn't necessary, and I think they put a different tail wheel on it for land use, so it was a little easier to maneuver on the ground. But other than that, it was essentially the same aircraft that the Navy was using.
Wow, pretty fantastic. And you and I have both been fortunate to see Dauntlesses in flight, haven't we?
Absolutely. I was just thinking about it. The first time I ever saw the Dauntless SBD was at the Upper Cumberland Regional Air Show. It wasn't even an air show; it was a fly-in, and this has been 10 to 15 years ago. And I drove from the Tri-Cities to the Upper Cumberland show specifically because the Dauntless was going to be there giving rides. And got to the fly-in, and sure enough, a couple of people took rides, and that was the first time I ever got to see it fly. And the last time I saw it was down in Atlanta at that show, last year and a half ago. So as a matter of fact, that's where the picture behind me came from. It was just a beautiful commemorative Air Force plane flying.
Well, I want to thank the commemorative Air Force for keeping this plane so close to us, so we do get a chance to see it fly. Also, the Navy for deciding that the color scheme should be that dark blue, because it looks great in the sky, in most any sky. It really pops. It looks great. They've got the guns up in the rear as it's flying by and everything. It's a bad looking plane, and I've got some great pictures of it myself. So it's fun to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are several of them out there. I looked it up. There's at least 6 of them that are still airworthy, from East Coast to West Coast. So if you want to see one of these Dauntlesses, they're out there for you to see. So yeah, check one out if you get one at a show.
I was looking to see if there'd ever been any pictures. I couldn't find any that showed like a recent formation of Dauntlesses. They do that all the time with Mustangs and Corsairs sometimes. Not enough. We had a chance to talk to our friends at Tennessee Museum of Aviation about Neil had told us about when they had they have 6 or was it 7 Thunderbolts that flew formation many years ago. I haven't seen a multi-Dauntless formation that I can recall.
No, I don't recall ever seeing that in, the last 20 years. I don't know anybody that's got a gathering of SBDs.
Well, I think here at the History of Aviation podcast, we should put that call out there. And we are challenging you, Dauntless owners, to get it together, and for us and for everybody else to form up, maybe at Oshkosh, the year of the Dauntless. Whatever it takes, but I would love to see that.
Absolutely.
Because 1 is fantastic. 3 or 4 would be incredible.
Yes, it would. I mean, it just, bring back memories of what it, must have been like when they were flying off of an aircraft carrier and forming up overhead, and just hear all those engines rumbling by. Yeah, that would be impressive.
Well, and, there are videos that show what that heaving, pitching deck was like, and the idea of trying to roll down the runway And these were not steam launched catapulting off the deck. These guys are just running into the wind and going as best as they can. But oftentimes, again, that deck pitching and heaving up and down and up and down, and bringing it back in the same type of conditions. Amazing that these guys were then able to get up, concentrate, find their target, and then go into that dive and drop those bombs, make the mark.
And then find the aircraft carrier on the way back. That to me is still an amazing, the knowledge of, navigating the open oceans to find an aircraft carrier after you've just been through hell. That's an amazing feat in itself.
Sure is. And we know that how many of these were built?
5,936 total. So a little short of 6,000.
Yeah, it wasn't a massive run, was it?
No, wasn't a massive run.
Compared to some of the other warplanes that we've talked about, that's actually a smaller number than many of them.
Well, and it stuck around a little bit longer than it really should have, because the Curtiss Helldiver was supposed to come in and replace it, and because of teething problems with that aircraft, the Dauntless stuck around, I think, for an extra year or two more than it really, was planned for. I mean, it wasn't really a great. By 44, it was pretty much outclassed, but with nothing to replace it, you stick with what works.
Sure do. Were there other navies or air forces that flew it?
Yes, there sure was. We sent them to New Zealand. They used them in the Solomons. We had some that were going to the Free French. They flew them in Europe, apparently. But I think a bunch of those were planned to go over there, and they obviously, when France fell, the Navy took control of those. And really interesting is Mexico was given a bunch of the Banshees, the Army aircraft, and they flew them for patrol missions in the Gulf of Mexico during World War II. And then they flew them as border patrol planes until 1959. So there were Dauntlesses still flying until 59.
I was thinking that some of the survivors were, came out of the Mexican, was that the Navy or the Air Force?
That I don't know. I did not see it. Just it was just that Mexico had them, so I don't know which group was operating them.
Yeah. Well, there are several of these in museums as well, so it is a plane that that you can see. And David, did you get? Do I remember correctly? You were down in Pensacola not long ago.
That is correct. And to be honest with you, in studying up on the Dauntless, I realized that I took pictures of the Dauntless while I was there, but I didn't realize the history of that Dauntless. It is a Pearl Harbor survivor.
Tell us about that one. Yeah.
It is an amazing aircraft. It was there at Pearl Harbor. It went into battle. Was it the Coral Sea? I believe it took part in. So it had multiple combat situations that it was involved in. And then it was used in training where it was lost in a lake, I believe, wasn't it?
It was one of the ones up in Lake Michigan, I believe, wasn't it?
That's exactly. And they fished it out.
Flying off the Wolverine or the Sable.
Yep.
Those training ships that they had in Lake Michigan. And, part of training, there are accidents, and there are a lot of aircraft went down deep in some cold, fresh water. And that plane was recovered along with many others. But that's an amazing story with the Pearl Harbor history, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And, I'm kicking myself now thinking, I've got to get back there and take some more pictures of this plane because, I took it, from a distance. I didn't get up close and really say, this is a real war veteran right here. I just didn't realize what I was looking at when I saw it.
Well, so you're saying you're going to have to return to Pensacola?
As soon as possible, yes. I think that's going to have to be done at some point. There's a certain other unnamed person I know that would like to go, so that may have to be worked out at some point in the near future.
Well, I think a field trip on behalf of the podcast. We should investigate the possibilities of some live remote situations now that they're back open. And David, there are some requirements ID wise, correct?
Yes, there are. You best have the correct IDs and make sure you check the website for the National Museum down there in Pensacola so you have the correct things. We were very close to not having those in hand, but got it taken care of in time.
That was close, but you made it happen, which was important.
Yes.
Speaking of museums, though, I know that we have the flying one that's based out of the Commemorative Air Force in Georgia, and I'm pretty sure the museum up in Dayton has a A-24 version, I believe.
That is correct.
Where's the closest non-flying Dauntless to us? Do you have a list that shows that?
I sure do. There. Okay, so we just mentioned the Dayton Museum, the Air Force Museum. They've got an A-24. The Pensacola and the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum have an SBD-2. The New Orleans World War II Museum, the USS Lexington in Texas, the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, Virginia, and the Air Zoo Museum in Michigan. They all have the SBD-3. The SBD-4 is at the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, San Diego Aerospace Museum, and Midway Airport in Chicago. The SBD-5 can be found at the USS Yorktown, the Valiant Air Command in Florida, Palm Springs Air Museum in California, and the American Heritage Museum in Massachusetts. And SBD-6.
Wow. I believe that one at Patriots Point in Charleston was the first one I saw.
Probably for me as well.
Yeah.
That's probably the very first time I saw one. And the SBD-6 at the USS Midway in San Diego, California, and the National Air and Space Museum in DC. So anyway, there are multiple ones across the country.
Sure are. Sorry for cutting you off there.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's and then we were talking about airworthy ones. Erickson and Lone Star Flight Museum have an airworthy A-24. Yanks Air Museum in Chino, California, and the National Museum of World War II Aviation in Colorado have a -4. -5 is at Plains of Fame in California, and the CAF has a -5 in Georgia. So there's at least 6 of them there across the U.S.
Fantastic. Well, Yanks and Plains of Fame are awful close to each other. But I know that sometimes they have so many things that can fly that it's just tough to keep them flying.
Yep.
But that might be our best bet to see a formation if they ever were able to organize something like that.
Well, true, because they're 2 in Texas, 2 in California, 1 in Colorado. So most of those are West Coasters. If we could get those together, that'd be fabulous.
Well, we're lucky then. When you put it that way, we're awful lucky that we're so close to the one here in Georgia. And you mentioned it. It's been up here at the is that Lebanon, the airport that you saw it at?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and I've seen it in Crossville. I know at least one time that it's been up here.
Yeah, it gets around. So it does a lot of fly-ins, does ride flights. So, it's out and about. So it's there, in this area if you want to see it. Just check that CAF website and see where it's going.
I wondered, I know you were talking about that as a fighter, this plane did have some success. I'm going to throw this back to you and Bruce's favorite moment of the show. This is Stump the Bruce. Actually, it's not. It's more like Stump the Dave. Did you find out any numbers of how many aircraft were actually shot down by, would you say Dauntlesses or Dauntless Eye? What's the plural?
Good question. It's probably just Dauntless.
Right.
Well, I did not find a number of aircraft shot down. However, I did find this, that there are claims that it has a plus score against enemy aircraft, meaning it was credited with more victories over enemy planes than losses from enemy action. And this is pretty much a rare thing for a bomber. So it shot down more airplanes than the Dauntless was shot down. So,
yeah,
there's not exact numbers, but that's the general theory.
And there weren't a lot of these shot down, were they?
No, I don't believe
I mean,
so. I
it,
mean,
it was a pretty tough competitor, that's for sure. And even though, again, with the mission that it flew, it was right in the middle of all that aircraft fire and diving down. And what'd you say, a 6G pullout?
6 to 8G pullout.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh, and pretty survivable. This is a tough plane. So the SBD thing is it's kind of unfair. Yeah, it was slow, but it absolutely was deadly. No
It
doubt.
absolutely was.
Not to its crew. I'm sure they loved it.
Okay, let me tell you just how deadly it was. So Dauntlesses would sink more than 300,000 tons of enemy shipping during the war. It was what was it here? 6 Japanese carriers, 14 enemy cruisers, 6 destroyers, 15 transports or cargo ships, and scores of various lesser craft. I mean, everything from subs to battleships to the carriers. I mean, it went against anything that floated.
Wow.
Lots and lots of flexibility there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another statistic I found. SBDs flew 1,189,473 operational hours, with 25% of all operational hours flown off of aircraft carriers being in the SBD. So
That's an
it flew.
amazing number.
Impressive numbers.
Yeah.
That's wow. Those are incredible statistics when you realize how important this aircraft was to our effort in the Pacific. It shortened the war.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely did. No doubt about it. 25% of the flight hours were flown in the SBD, with all the other Hellcats, Wildcats, Devastators, so on and so forth. This is the plane that did most of the flying, it seems like.
You left out Corsair, Dave.
Oh, yes, I did. My mistake.
Your favorite plane. I know it's hard to say that, hard to acknowledge that this plane flew more missions in hours than the Corsair as well. But again, the overall feeling is that this plane changed the course of the war. And aircraft designers always have to be looking ahead. And how do you plan in the mid-30s to design an aircraft with all these capabilities? You're reading what's ahead. You're looking at global politics and thinking about what it might require. You're looking at those Devastators. You're looking at the other carrier-based fighter aircraft and defensive, aircraft that you might have, and thinking, we still got biplanes on these carriers. We're gonna have to take a page out of the future here and up the ante quite a bit, and having a need to maybe supply the allies over in Europe with some war materials and trying to stave off the Japanese, with some of the things we were doing in the jungles and helping the Chinese. We were learning quickly, and so those lessons that we learned really came into play, I guess, in the development of this aircraft.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Something that's interesting, we were talking about the Corsair. There were a couple of interesting variants I found to the SBD. One of them was that, I'm sure you've seen photos of the Corsair attacking an island and firing rockets off the wings.
Yes.
The SBD was also fitted with those forward-firing aircraft rockets. So it was capable of doing the same thing as the Corsair was. So it had that capability. Another thing, it was a photo reconnaissance ship. It was the SBD-1P to 4P. So they went out and did photo reconnaissance. And the most interesting one is the DGP-1, where the hard points on the outer wings, where you would normally put a 100-pound bomb, they would put twin 50 caliber machine guns in pods underneath the wing and use them to, I assume, strafe targets with. So, there's a couple of variants to the SBD for different uses.
Lee, I did not know that about the guns and the pods. I'm thinking about the rockets and those dive brakes. Do you put the dive brakes? Make sure that they're up. Obviously, you're not firing rockets in a dive, I guess. But I mean, that could really change how things operate there.
Well, just more capability for the aircraft. Adaptable. That's all the great aircraft are adaptable to other uses. That's what makes them great.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Speaking of great, what was our power plant in this aircraft?
It was a Wright 1820-60 Cyclone 9-cylinder air-cooled radial piston engine of about 1,200 horsepower. The amazing part is that engine is basically the same engine that was in the C-47, the B-17, the Brewster Buffalo, and scores of other aircraft during the war. It was a well-used, proven aircraft engine. It was very good.
And plenty of them available. So,
oh, absolutely. Yeah. Tons and tons of those Wright Cyclones were available.
It's always interesting to think about, the correlation between engine development and aircraft development. And a plane that, has the right engine makes all the difference too. So this was a very good marriage, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It was like I said, they improved it. Every version got a bigger, better engine, and it didn't always increase the speed because there was, every time they improved it, they added more weight. They changed the electrical system from 12 volt to 24 volts so it could have radar and better radio equipment. So, the engines increased, the armament, the, guns increased, it's just a constant battle of we need more performance to help, more capabilities. And so
and you mentioned would we get all the way up to -6 on this plane?
Correct. Yes.
And so obviously all those were advances and changes and upgrades, whether it's avionics, engines, battery power, or, weaponry, all of those things. We were committed to this plane. We wanted this to work, and there was a lot of development over time, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and this one proved itself pretty quickly. I think the Navy felt confident in it, and that's why they continued to work with it. It's because they knew the capability was there.
Where were most of these constructed?
California, I believe. I forgot the name.
Is that sound right?
That sounds right, but yeah, most of them were in California.
And then, as typical, they weren't flying these aircraft to the theater. They were putting them on carriers and carrying them across the Pacific.
That is correct. Yes, they would pack an aircraft carrier full of these things and ship them out to the sea.
Yeah.
The other thing is the range of these aircraft is about 1,200 miles. So, it's a reasonably good range, but it's not, massive. I think the ferry range was about 1,500 miles with some underwing drop tanks. So, to get it to the Pacific, they had to be put on an aircraft carrier.
Absolutely. Well, and you mentioned, with that scouting role or the combat role, I mean, you take off from a carrier, you want to find your carrier. And there's stories of aircraft landing on other carriers because that's what it took, or maybe their carrier was damaged in battle or whatever. But, that's with everything happening, to be able to also find that safe place to land. What a relief that had to be.
Absolutely. I mean, those guys, when they saw the lights of their carrier, they had to feel relief that, we're home.
Yep,
definitely.
Absolutely.
As we're talking about the Douglas SBD Dauntless, let's jump into closing thoughts, starting with you, Dave Gorman.
Well, I started off talking about my earliest impression of this aircraft, and it really hasn't changed. It's one I've been fascinated by for a long, long time, and just like the looks of it. It looked like a warplane. It looked like a champion. The dive brakes were something that was new to me. When I'm like, well, what in the world is that for? And, it was a great thing to be able to sit and talk with my dad about the history of this aircraft, the whole thing with the trapeze and clearing the prop. It just made my imagination just think, who does this? Who are these people that have that kind of bravery? This plane just represents heroes. and I love talking about it. So great choice.
Closing thoughts, David Rowe?
I agree with everything there. It is a fabulous airplane. I would recommend if you want to learn or see, this plane in action. There's plenty of videos to watch. You can also watch that Midway movie that I mentioned from a couple of years ago. It's a little far-fetched in a few ways, but it's reasonably accurate. So check that out. It's just, an unbelievably great airplane with a great history behind it. And, it's just fun to read about what, it was capable of and what it could do. And, learned a lot of new things about it. And, even more high in my list of great aircraft. So I'm glad we put it on the list.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And we want to let everybody know that we're going to take a short hiatus here for the Christmas holiday. And we will be returning the first week of January with the Cessna 310. That's going to be a fun one. And I'd like to thank all of our listeners out there for the support over this year. We had a wonderful year here on the History of Aviation podcast and looking forward for another great year. And there are a few people we want to give a special thanks to. Number one, EAA Chapter 1494, President Karen Hughes Collins, for joining us on episode 32. Me and Dave Gorman got to go down to the flying in Morristown there with Karen.
That was a great time. It was a perfect day. What I loved about what Karen and the whole Chapter 1494 were doing up there was just there were so many kids who were having a great time, and there were people who were there to talk with kids about aviation. There were people who were, kids had hands-on stuff. There were aircraft they could look at and touch and sit in and learn about. There were aircraft that were models, and it was just great. And aircraft flying by and get up close and personal and hear it and smell it and see it and everything else. So big ups to Karen and her crew. They put on a great show up there. And great event. Can't wait to go back and see them again. So it was really cool to be a part of that. Also, man, how about that time we spent at the Tennessee Museum of Aviation? I mentioned Neil and Rhonda Melton a little bit earlier, or at least Neil who did. We got to spend some time and hear about his own personal history up in Sevierville with the museum and with his journey through aviation. What an inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that place. It's a great museum. It's close in East Tennessee. If you're around, go check it out. They've got some great aircraft in there, World War II, Cold War, just, easy to get to and look at. Check it out.
The behind the ropes.
Pretty sure they're celebrating their 20th anniversary this month. Does that sound right?
Nice.
Yeah, that actually, it probably is about that long.
Maybe 21st anniversary. Maybe they were 2002, but it was December. So, but we've spent a lot of great time there, and it was awesome to take the show on the road and spend time in their hangar.
And we got the behind the ropes tour as well. That was
fantastic.
Great. That was
Neil's got some great stories, so it was fun. Definitely. A lot of fun. And speaking of fun, we had air show performer Greg Kuntz on our episode 37. And you talk about a guy having fun flying an airplane. Greg Kuntz is enjoying it. Exactly. That man knows how to put a plane through its paces. So thank you to Greg for coming on board and letting us pick his mind a little bit and learn a little bit about being an air show performer.
I'll tell you what, for a guy that I've seen fly probably 10 or 15 times at various shows, it was just so cool to that he had time to sit and talk with us about what he gets to do and why. And once again, one thing that these folks all have in common is their connection with their audience, with kids and with flying, and that part is just fantastic.
Yeah, anything we can do to make people interested in aviation, I'm all for it.
I was going to also mention that we would like to take a moment and just pay tribute to Jenny Blaylock, who folks knew her as Tennessee Fly Girl. She was a local aviator who was working through her building up her hours, and she documented her flying journeys and everything. And the loss of Jenny and her father in a recent accident was sad to everybody who loved public aviation, and was certainly send our regards and our best wishes to her family and friends.
Definitely. And any of those episodes, if this is your first time tuning in, go back. This is episode number 38. We're 38 in, so all those other episodes are available. I've actually had a few folks ask me, how do you get to the old episodes? You just have to go back. Some people actually do think this the latest episodes all you can listen to. That's not the case. You can actually go back and listen from episode 1 straight through to 38.
Archive is there. Pick
It's
out your
there.
favorite. Tell us something about it. Let us know what you think.
Oh, yeah. And suggestions for the future are always appreciated.
Definitely. And I would like to wish all of our listeners out there a safe and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Absolutely. Everyone be safe, have fun, and we look forward to chatting again in the new year.
We appreciate everybody. Keep them flying and keep your eyes on the sky and your lenses clean or something.
For David Rowe, Dave Gorman, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast. See you next year.
This is Joe Morse. You are listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.